All right, so let's talk some of our outright bets here for this one. And again, we will talk all of our other bets outside of just outrights. We'll talk long shots that we have in the account, but let's talk these outright bets, Steven, that we've got that are kind of dudes that it's not like we're not taking shots on bombs here. These are the guys that, you know, we have good, confident outright bets in, and we'll talk about the long shots that we're on a little bit later. The first one for me, and like I said, this will let you know right out of the gate whenever I say that even though I put strokes gained putting in my model this week, it does not mean that I'm married to it, because the first guy that I have an outright ticket on this week is Corey Connors. And the reason being is Corey Connors in the 36 round, in the 24 round, and even in the 12 round model that I ran, Corey Connors in the top 5 in all 3 of those. He is third actually in the 36 round. He is third in the 24 round and finds himself at 4th in the 12 round. And it's, you know, you look across and you're like, well, why wouldn't you want to play this guy? Look, he's 6th in the field in the last 36 rounds, strokes gains approach. He's 10th in fairways gained. He's 6th in good drive. So he's got all of that going for you. Yes, everything looks great. Then you get strokes gained putting, Steven, 101st in this field in strokes gained putting. So again, I'm not married to the putting statistic. I was just curious. I wanted to see where the guys that I'm on, where they stack up to the field here. But everything else that I'm looking for in this tournament, Corey Connors brings to the table, and it's just too hard for me to ignore that. It doesn't matter how far I go back or how recent I look, and every single one of these categories that I'm looking at outside of the putting, he is right up there at the top of the field.
He's top 10 in 5 of the metrics that I have in the model that I'm using this week. And he's similar to a couple different guys for me. And same thing happened with me. He still peaked into my top 10 over the last 50 rounds. I think that's one area, by the way, that I think you and I are going to be a little bit different here. I'm looking more long range than I have most weeks. Like in the middle of the season, I'm going to look at last 36 rounds, maybe even last 24 rounds. But for this week, with a lot of these guys playing their first tournament after a decent break here, I want to look a little bit more long range. So maybe that's where we have a little bit of a difference in our outright cards. But the one similarity for sure is that a guy like Corey Connors in the top 10 for me, a guy like Russell Henley as well, Keegan Bradley, Emiliano Grillo, these guys that can't putt a lick, but they're still popping in the top 10 of this model because they are pretty good in all of these other categories. So I know Russell Henley's another guy that you're looking at as well.
Yeah, so as far as these guys that are not like super long shots, though, you're getting a pretty juicy number on these guys. I mean, Steven, if you look at our odds comparison tool, what's the best number you can get on Corey Connors right now? I mean, it's still probably pretty good in the 20s, right? I would imagine.
Yeah, let me see here. Over at thelines.com, if you go to the bottom of our SONY Open tournament preview, you will find the odds comparison tool. And there's a 22-1 out there. Yeah. It was 25 at one shop. I think that's come down a little bit, but at worst 22-1 as we record this Wednesday morning. The
2 other guys that I have in here, and we talked a little bit about this before we got to recording, that you were saying, hey, look, I don't blame you because they're super high in my models as well. Just couldn't quite get there. Russell Henley and Taylor Gooch are the other 2 outright bets that I kind of have in this range right here, in the ones that I feel pretty solid, pretty good about, that I wouldn't consider to fall into that long shot range. With Henley, again, you go across and you just look at this model, and like the guy is so good at approach. He's so good when we're talking the proximity that I was looking at as well. He plays these 450-ish to 500 par 4s well as well. And then you start to look a little bit further down, and yeah, he's not the greatest putter long term, but if you look at a little bit more recent, he's actually not as bad as, not as bad as he has been over a while.
So that's putting, right? It's streaky. Yeah, that's putting. Yeah.
And so you look at over the last 24 rounds, as opposed to the last, let's call it 50. Over the last 24 rounds, he does find himself 45th in this field. And, look, that's decent. That's not the worst thing in the world there, but really it's all the other stats that pop for me on Russell Henley that really have him up there for me. And then as far as Taylor Gooch, I mean, no player out there has climbed the world golf rankings like Taylor Gooch has. I mean, it's kind of under the radar for guys, especially Stephen, that you and I follow golf super heavily, but I think that people that don't follow golf, I don't think Taylor Gooch even pops up on their radar, probably don't even know the name. But this is a guy who quietly, over the last 24 rounds, he is second overall in this field in strokes gained approach. He is 15th in good drive, so he's finding fairways. The approach game is really, really good. He is getting not having to scramble very much as well. Again, the reason he's just not at the top of a lot of the models, if you look, strokes gained putting, 66th in the field when it comes to this. So I am going with a lot of guys that don't really fit the strokes gained putting model here. I just wanted to look at it, weigh it in, have an effect on where these guys pop. But the fact that these guys are still popping so incredibly high with the poor putting, that just lets me know that they're everything that I'm looking for outside of the putting. And I'll hope that the flat stick can get hot over 4 days. So those are the three kind of in this, let not call it the long shot range that I'm on: Connors, Henley, and Gooch.
Yeah, I think people are listening wondering, why we're not playing some of the favorites here. And I think the prices are just too short, right? Yeah. The guys like Cam Smith, who won last week, is a single digit favorite. Webb Simpson, who has done everything but win at this event, is shorter than 20-1. Sung J M shorter than 20-1. Just not really appetizing prices, right? Even Mark Leishman, who's been getting some bets here, has dropped below 20-1 at this point. So it's just a good tournament with a lot of these guys coming off a layoff to take a shot a little further down the board and try and find, especially when they're climbing as high in our models this week as they are. So a little context on that. I did find it interesting, Matt, that Russell Henley was first in my model over the last 100 rounds and better putting in there, still around middle of this field, but better putting over that span than he has been over the past 50 rounds. So maybe you can forgive the putting a little bit less this week. And he is a past winner here. So I might have to reconsider not having Russell Henley on my betting card, to be quite honest with you. But the three that stood out to me, let's start with a guy who has the same exact odds at one shop as Russell Henley. Abraham Answer, for me, was my first outright bet.
Okay.
Past winner, won the WGC FedEx St. Jude last year in a smaller field, but loaded, a lot more loaded with better golfers than what's in this one. Number one in my model over the last 50 rounds. Top 30 in 8 of the 10 statistical categories I have in my model, and the other 2, top 40. So really clean profile across the board here for this week. That included top 3 in par 4 scoring from those 2 distances that we care most about, 400 to 450, 450 to 500, which I think is huge this week because if he's getting close to the hole from those distances, there's, a third of the course or more at that 450 to 500 par 4 range. The next guy I popped in, 46-1, Seamus Power, who I think has really been coming on strong here, really improved his game. 46-1, fourth over the last 50 rounds in the model I'm using, second over the last 36 rounds behind only Sung J M. And you're getting more than double the odds of Sung J M. Mm-hmm. So another guy that I liked. And lastly, a guy who may not fit the model as well this week, but kind of a head scratcher for me with where his odds were. And they were even longer than this. They've shortened since we were recording this. I know you've liked this guy, Jason Kokrak, 46-1 for a guy who's won 3 times since last October. I mean, we talk about win equity all the time and chasing some of these guys who've never won on the tour. And here's a guy who's won 3 times on tour over the past 15 months or so at 46-1. He is top 20 over the last 100 rounds in the model this week, and he's been strong in both approach and strokes gained putting. So the concern for me this week is that he's kind of been spraying it around off the tee. He's also lost 5 yards in distance off the tee since last year's statistics. It's early in the year, but that's curious to me. He is an older guy, so I don't know what's going on there with his distance. But this is also a course where I care less about distance off the tee. So a guy who's won 3 times and as strong as he is on approach and putting really stood out to me.